Tower Hill, London. July the 28th, 1540. Early morning. Thomas Cromwell walks out into the open air for the last time. 6 weeks ago, he was the most powerful man in England. He ran the government. He controlled the king's finances, his religious policy, his marriage. Henry VIII trusted no one more. This morning, he is going to lose his head. And across the city, at the exact same hour, Henry VIII is getting married. A celebration on one side of London, an execution on the other, and the man being killed is the one who arranged the wedding. No trial, no real defense, just a rumor, a letter, a change in the king's mood, and 6 weeks later, the most powerful man in England is gone. That is what Henry VIII's court looked like in 1540. And if it could happen to Cromwell, a man who had spent 20 years learning every rule, every danger, every corridor of power, then the question is, what did it actually take to survive this place? That is what this video is going to show you. Hampton Court Palace in 1540 was not a home. It was a machine, and the machine had one purpose: to control who got close to the king. When you arrived at Hampton Court, you entered through the great gatehouse into the first courtyard, the base court. It was an arrivals area, lodging rooms on 3 sides, servants, minor officials, people waiting. This was as far as most people ever got, not because they were turned away, because the next door simply never opened for them. Every room deeper into the palace was a higher rank. Every door had a guard, and that guard made a decision about you the moment you walked toward him, based almost entirely on how you looked. Your clothing was not fashion, it was a key. The more expensive your coat, the more gold on your collar, the finer the fabric, the more likely the guard stepped aside. Courtiers understood this. They spent money they often didn't have on clothing they needed to be seen in, because being seen correctly was the difference between staying in the outer courtyard and getting into the rooms where power actually moved. Past the base court was the Great Hall. 600 courtiers were entitled to eat here twice a day. 600 people in one room, watching each other constantly, reading faces, tracking who sat where, who spoke to whom, who left early. Past the Great Hall was the Great Watching Chamber. The numbers thinned here, guards in red, less noise, more tension. This was where you waited, sometimes for hours, for permission to go further. And further meant the Privy Chamber. The Privy Chamber was where the king lived, where he dressed, ate privately, met with his closest advisors, and held the kind of conversations that shaped the country. Only a handful of men were authorized to enter freely. They were called the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, and their access to Henry was the single most valuable thing a person could possess at this court. Not land, not title, not money, access. Because everything else, land, title, money, safety, flowed from the king's favour. And you could not receive his favour if you could never get close enough to be seen. The palace was designed to make proximity to power a prize. And like every prize worth having, it came with a cost most people didn't see until it was too late. Getting into the palace was only the first problem. Once you were inside, you had to perform. Every hour, every day, without a single mistake. Tudor court life operated on a code of behaviour so precise that breaking it, even accidentally, could mark you as disloyal, unstable, or worse, as someone who needed watching. And at Henry VIII's court in 1540, being watched for the wrong reasons was how careers ended, and sometimes how lives ended. The rule started with your body. You never turned your back on the king. Not in greeting, not when leaving a room. You faced him, bowed, and retreated. Turning away was an insult, a signal, intentional or not, that you did not regard him as the center of the room. At Henry's court, he was always the center of the room. You did not speak in the Privy Chamber unless spoken to. You did not laugh too loudly. You did not show surprise. You did not let your face say anything your mouth wasn't permitted to say. Contemporary accounts describe courtiers who had spent years learning to hold their expressions, breaking still in the king's presence, because Henry read faces. He watched, and he remembered. His moods were the weather system everyone lived inside. In his younger years, Henry had been described as golden, athletic, generous, genuinely charming. By 1540, that man was largely gone. The jousting injuries had left him in chronic pain. His body had changed dramatically. His temper had shortened to almost nothing. People who had known him for decades said they no longer recognized the pattern of his rages. They came faster, attached to smaller things, and the consequences were larger. One Spanish observer who spent time near the court put it plainly. Being close to Henry was like having fun with tamed lions. The lion was calm, until it wasn't, and you would not know which moment would be the last safe one. So courtiers learned to read the signs. Was he eating well? Was he sleeping? Had he been in pain? Who had he spoken to that morning? Small questions that carried enormous weight, because arriving in the wrong room on the wrong day, with the wrong news, in front of the wrong version of Henry, was not just unpleasant, it was dangerous. If you survived the architecture and mastered the behavior, you were ready for the real game. Patronage. Everything at Henry's court ran on favour. Land grants, government offices, legal protection, tax exemptions, military appointments. None of it moved through formal systems the way we might expect today. It moved through people. Specifically, through people who had the king's ear. If you wanted something, you needed someone closer to Henry than you to ask on your behalf. And if you wanted to be that person, the one others came to, you needed to have built something rare and fragile, genuine royal trust. That trust was worth more than any title. It was the engine of everything. Thomas Cromwell understood this better than almost anyone alive. He was not born into nobility. His father was a blacksmith and cloth merchant in Putney. He had no inherited land, no ancient family name, no natural claim to power. What he had was intelligence, an extraordinary capacity for administrative work, and an ability to make himself indispensable to people who mattered. He worked his way up through the legal world, into the service of Cardinal Wolsey. And when Wolsey fell from favour in 1529, Cromwell managed something almost no one else had. He survived his patron's collapse and attached himself directly to the king. By the mid-1530s, he was running England, dissolution of the monasteries, the restructuring of the English church, the management of Henry's marriages, government finances, foreign policy, all of it flowed through Cromwell. And then, in the spring of 1540, his enemies moved. A faction at court, led largely by the conservative Duke of Norfolk, fed Henry a carefully constructed set of accusations. That Cromwell was secretly sympathetic to Protestant heresy, that he had overstepped his authority, that he could not be trusted. They chose their moment carefully. Henry was already furious about his marriage to Anne of Cleves, a match Cromwell had arranged and Henry despised. The ground was already soft. In June 1540, Cromwell was arrested at the Privy Council table by the men he had sat beside for years. He was given no proper trial. He was attainted by Parliament, which meant his guilt was simply declared rather than proven. 6 weeks later, he was dead. 20 years of loyal service, 6 weeks to erase it. If you were a courtier at Hampton Court in 1540, do you think you could have survived? Let me know in the comments, and think carefully before you answer. Because the man at the centre of all of this was not predictable. He was not rational, and by 1540, he was not well. This is the part most people don't fully picture when they think of Henry VIII. They picture the famous Holbein portrait, the wide stance, the broad chest, the expression that says he owns every room he has ever stood in. And that portrait is real. Holbein painted it around 1540. But what it also shows, if you look past the authority, is a man whose body had fundamentally changed. Henry's waist had expanded from 32 inches to 52 inches. He had gone from one of the most athletically gifted men in England, a jousting champion, a tennis player, a man who hunted for hours, to someone who could barely walk without pain. A jousting accident in 1536 had left him with a leg wound that never properly healed. It ulcerated repeatedly. The pain was chronic and some days severe. He compensated the way people in unmanaged pain often do. He ate excessively, he drank heavily, and both made everything worse. His moods, already volatile, became increasingly untethered from the events around them. A French ambassador who spent significant time observing the court wrote that Henry was consumed by distrust, that he wanted to be liked by everyone around him but trusted absolutely no one, that he was constantly looking for evidence that the people closest to him were deceiving him. That kind of paranoia in a man with the power to execute is not just a personality flaw, it is a structural danger for every single person in the building, because it meant that innocence was not protection. Cromwell had been innocent of the specific charges against him, or at the very least, the charges were wildly disproportionate to anything he had actually done. It did not matter. Henry believed what he was told because he was already looking for reasons to believe it. The accusation landed on soil that had been prepared by years of pain, suspicion, and the particular loneliness of absolute power. You could do everything right at this court and still not be safe. The same day Thomas Cromwell lost his head, July the 28th, 1540, Henry VIII married Catherine Howard. She was, by most historical estimates, somewhere between 16 and 17 years old. Henry was 49, in chronic pain, increasingly paranoid, and had already been through 4 marriages. Catherine had grown up in the crowded household of her step-grandmother, the Duchess of Norfolk, with little education and almost no preparation for what was about to happen to her. But she had youth, and she had charm, and she had the support of the Norfolk faction, the same men who had just destroyed Cromwell. They had placed her in Henry's path deliberately. She was their instrument. She didn't fully know that yet. For a short time, it worked. Henry adored her. He called her his rose without a thorn. She received jewels, gowns, lands, appointments for her family members. Everything the court could offer flowed toward her. She had reached the highest point any woman at this court could reach. And then the rumors started. Allegations surfaced about her life before Henry. Relationships she had been involved in as a young girl in the Duchess's household. In the world of Tudor court politics, her past was weaponized. Archbishop Cranmer, reluctantly, was the one who handed Henry the written accusations. Henry reportedly wept when he read them. Then the weeping stopped. In November 1541, Catherine was placed under house arrest at Hampton Court while the investigation proceeded. She was told she would not see the king. At some point during those days, she broke free from her attendants. She ran down the long gallery at Hampton Court toward the Chapel Royal, where Henry was hearing Mass. She was screaming his name. She needed to reach him, to speak to him directly, to make him see her as a person and not an accusation. The guards caught her before she reached the chapel door. Henry did not come out. He never saw her again. In February 1542, Catherine Howard was executed on Tower Green, the same place Anne Boleyn had died 6 years earlier. She was, in all likelihood, still a teenager, the rose without a thorn. So who survived? Not the bravest, not the most loyal, not even necessarily the most intelligent. The ones who survived Henry VIII's court in 1540 were the ones who understood a single brutal truth. The court did not reward loyalty. It rewarded the performance of loyalty. And there is a difference. Thomas Cromwell survived. He was Archbishop of Canterbury, deeply associated with religious reform, exactly the kind of person Henry's conservative enemies wanted destroyed. In 1543, a group of bishops on the Privy Council compiled a full dossier of heresy charges against him and presented it to Henry. It was a coordinated attack, built over months, with real evidence. By every measure, Cranmer was finished. Henry summoned him privately. At night, he showed Cranmer the charges, and then he did something that almost no one at this court ever experienced. He handed Cranmer his own royal ring and told him, "If they arrest you, show them this. It brings the matter directly to me." The next morning, the council arrested Cranmer in the chamber. He produced the ring. Henry called the councillors in, looked at them, and told them they had made fools of themselves. The charges were dropped. Cranmer had survived, not because he fought, not because he was powerful, but because he had spent years making himself the one person Henry trusted completely. He had never threatened him, never outshone him, never made the king feel small. He bent perfectly to the shape of what Henry needed, and when the attack came, Henry moved to protect him. That was the survival skill, not courage, not cunning. The quiet, sustained, exhausting work of making yourself indispensable without ever making yourself dangerous. Most people at Henry's court never mastered it. The ones who did lived. The ones who didn't became warnings. Henry VIII's court destroyed some of the most powerful, experienced, and politically skilled people in England, not through warfare, but through proximity. The closer you stood to that man, the more you were exposed to everything he had become by 1540. Paranoid, unpredictable, in pain, and capable of ending a life with a change of mood. Cromwell built 20 years of power and lost it in 6 weeks. Catherine Howard had everything the court could offer and was dead before she was 20. The ones who lasted were not heroes. They were survivors, careful, quiet, and relentlessly self-aware. If you want to see more of these stories, the real documented lives of the people history nearly forgot, subscribe to Worlds Before Us. Every video goes deeper into the moments that shaped the world before we arrived in it. We'll see you there.